Everyone out there, Dan here, aka the Comic Concierge, and this is one of my top 10 comic book videos where I go through the week of comics that I've read and pick out my top 10 favorite books. Don't worry, no spoilers here. However, if you're worried at all, check down below for timestamps and chapter titles, and you'll be able to skip a book if you so choose. Last week I started this, I'm going to continue it this week, and before I get into the good, talking a little bit about the bad, getting into the book that was the biggest disappointment for me for the week, a book I had expectations for, and a book that failed to meet those expectations for one reason or another. This week, that book is The Amazing Spider-Man number 67. And when I talked in my starting points video, I mentioned that I kind of dropped off Nick Spencer's run quite a while ago. It just wasn't clicking for me. So it's a bit weird that it's also still disappointing me. The reason, though, is that I can't necessarily say if The Amazing Spider-Man 67 was a good or bad book. I will say it was a very bad starting point. Despite being this kind of new event that's going to be now weekly, it was not very welcoming for a reader that hasn't been reading this title. If the point of arcs is to kind of allow readers to catch up, allow readers to feel like they can jump into a book, this issue I felt failed to do that. It did not feel like the beginning of a new storyline. It felt like I was jumping into the middle of a book. I'm not against jumping into a book midstream. And when I do that, I have the expectations that I might be a bit lost. I'll need to tie a few things, do some classic inferencing, use those skills to figure out what's going on. However, when you're kind of launching this new weekly series that's going to be continuing, and you put this new number one, and not necessarily in the title, but this chameleon conspiracy, pushing it forward that this is going to be this event to follow, or whatever terminology you want to use. Is it an event? Is it just a comic? Who knows? Being really impenetrable as a new reader like this issue seems a bit like a misstep to me. So as someone that was hoping that this would be a great jumping on point to get back onto Nick Spencer's run on Spider-Man, that wasn't the case. I don't know if I'll check out the next issue, maybe, but I found this issue to be impenetrable, unfortunately, so it's not one I could recommend in any shape or form. All right, enough of the bad. Let's get to the good by talking about my number 10. My number 10 is serial number 4. And anytime I get more Terry Moore art in my life, I'm going to be a very happy camper. And that's been the case with this. And I was a huge fan of 5 Years. That was Terry Moore's last series, and a big standout character in that was Zoe, who was part of past series for Terry Moore as well, but she was really kind of a bundle of joy in that book. So I was excited knowing that she's kind of getting her own spin-off, and the spin-off has not been exactly what I expected. I guess I didn't necessarily expect this procedural, but I guess with the name Serial, I should have kind of connected the dots, and seeing this police procedural, her playing the role of detective. And in this issue, you're seeing that Zoe may be just as twisted in certain ways as the serial killer that she is hunting. And I think that's just kind of spicing things up in a fun way. And again, getting that beautiful looking Terry Moore art is something I'm always a fan of. And I mentioned with Amazing Spider-Man how it was impenetrable for a new reader or someone who's jumping on board and hasn't really read the last few issues. With this, even if you've never read any Terry Moore books before, if you've not read 5 Years, Rachel Rising, anything like that, you really don't necessarily need that. Everything is here. This is its own standalone story. You may not fully get the picture of who Zoe is or what Zoe is, because Zoe isn't exactly this little kid per se, but it's not necessarily important for the story being told. If anything, it might actually make the story seem better in a way. I think Terry Moore fans know too with his books that you never know the direction a story can go. It can change genres. Something like Strangers in Paradise started as his relationship drama, but really morphed throughout the years. And I think that's something that I love about his work, is that he lets the characters find this story. And with that, I think it allows for a lot of unexpected surprises. And this book, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of surprises. It's just like the great storytelling with his art. I think that's something that he's great at. Of course, he's great at just the character designs. He's iconic for that. But the storytelling in this issue I thought was fantastic. And after reading something like Red Room a few weeks ago, you would think a torture sequence wouldn't be difficult to witness on the page, but even so, something with a drill just kind of rubs you in the wrong way. But it was at least effective in what it was trying to do. So happy to see this is back, and I've been really enjoying the series thus far. My number 9 this week is the Immortal Hulk number 47. This is one of the best issues of the Immortal Hulk in some time. Maybe because I just got back to basics a little bit, in the sense of this is just the Hulk fighting the Avengers, and you might think, oh, we've seen that a million times, and yes, we have, but now we're seeing it through the lens of Joe Bennett and his body horror that we've seen with this series since the beginning, and this had a lot of standout moments, especially with Hulk and Thor going toe-to-toe, or maybe hammer to hand would be the better comparison. Like, I don't want to spoil it. I'll just say that Joe Bennett certainly had some creative ways of Hulk fighting Thor that utilized his body in ways I was not expecting. There was also story here too, some really big character moments, actually some really big developments, especially with the character of She-Hulk, because you see that she's conflicted in the fact that obviously she's an Avenger, but she's also, a gamma radiated person, and her relationship with Bruce Banner / Hulk, and that's a big part of this issue too, that conflict and dealing with just the general insanity of everything's going on beyond that. And you get the new Gamma team with Puck and everything that show up as well. This, I think, did more than anything to kind of move the story in the next direction. I think it's also setting up the Gamma Flight storyline that'll be continuing after the Hulk that we know. But I know there's only a couple issues left, and I think we're finally seeing kind of these pieces finally come together. I was hoping that this would catch steam, knowing we're nearing the end of issue number 50. And if it can continue this, I think we'll be in a good place when this finally ends in a few months. Number 8 for me is Youth Season 2, number 3, which is a title that's still kind of weird to say out loud, but what are you going to do? And this comes, of course, from Comixology. It's one of their original titles. And this issue in particular really went back to finish up a lot of what happened in season 1 in that final issue, dealing with the characters and that and their arc, revealing what really happened near the end, and has actually a huge death that's really going to, I think, shake things up moving forward. And this is also expanding upon the world of Youth. I wasn't sure what exactly this book was going to do. At first I was wondering if like these seasons wouldn't be connected, they would be just random characters dealing with similar trauma, but that clearly isn't the case, as now we're seeing this book that is taking a step back before we move forward, which was a little bit different, wasn't what I was expecting, although based upon the last issue, I did feel like we'd get some flashbacks to what happened in season 1. So if you're a person that just started in season 2, this will be kind of weird to read because these characters just kind of come onto the page. And I've been really liking this book in general. It's this idea of these superheroes that are teenagers but lack direction in the chaos that ensues. And I'm glad that we are seeing kind of the story from last season continue. In some ways, it could have ended there, and I think it would have been fine, but I do think there was a lot of room to develop, and now you're actually seeing kind of this team form as well as their mortal enemy, and setting more understanding of what this world is, and putting limitations on these characters' powers as well, because before this they kind of just seemed invincible. They can kind of do whatever they want, but now we're seeing that's not the case. So that's certainly going to be a huge part of things moving forward. Again, with this being a Comixology original, if you do have Comixology, you can get this for free, which is pretty great. However, you don't necessarily need that in order to read it. You can buy it separately digitally if you so choose. The other thing with these books too is that they are sometimes published in physical form as well, like Afterdrift that Chip Zdarsky did was published by Dark Horse. I don't know if this will. Season 1 hasn't been, so I'm not sure. I don't know the popularity of it. So if you hate digital comics, you may not be able to read it, but I do think it is actually a book that benefits from the digital format. I think it reads better, especially with the coloring design. So maybe, if you hate digital, just deal with it for a little bit and read this comic and see if you'll enjoy it. My number 7 this week is 1,000 Storms number 2, and this comes from Magnetic Press, and it's written and drawn by Tony Sandoval. And this is a book that, again, I think it's only available digitally right now. I doubt many stores have this in physical form, but you can get it on Comixology. And again, with Magnetic Press, they do tend to translate a lot of foreign comics, and this is one of my favorites ones they've done this year. They do really know how to pick out great books. And with this being written and drawn by Tony Sandoval, one of the greatest things about this series is how it really shifts in style to a great extent. Like, you would never think this was the same artist doing this entire book. This specific issue doesn't have as much variation when it comes to the styles, because it focuses on mostly one story of this young girl kind of going on this date with this young boy. However, it may be for notorious reasons, or as she's away, another boy is trying to discover if in fact that she's a witch, because she has this pale skin, she acts weird, people think she has magical powers, and they're kind of right, because she does have the ability to go to another dimension with this portal. However, we're seeing maybe she's not the only one with that skill. And it's a good example of just really human drama of a girl just trying to kind of fit in, find her place, with a world that doesn't necessarily accept her. There are a lot of different shifting timelines too. You have it when she's a younger, you do have some flash forwards when she's a little bit older, and it does seem like time is very fluid, especially with her traveling to different dimensions. And the other thing with this is that it clearly is a graphic novel that was split up into different sections, so it's not necessarily the best way to read this. I will say the pacing with this issue felt a lot better than the first issue that kind of ended abruptly. This one ended abruptly, but not as abruptly in a way. And with this being European too, I do think that the styles tend to be a little bit different and expectations are different when it comes to storytelling, especially in the issue format, so that it can also be maybe something lost in translation. But generally, I have really just enjoyed this world and the way it's been designed. It has an element of wonderment to it. And yeah, there is a lot of this craziness that's going on with other dimensions and shifting art styles. But I think at the heart of it, it gets into just the pain of having your heart broken when you have that young love, have that affection for someone, that first kiss, whatever that is, and seeing that crumble because realizing maybe it wasn't real or maybe it wasn't what you were expecting. So that human tragedy, along with all the kind of supernatural elements, has made it a complete comic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this ends in the next few weeks. My number 6 this week is Firepower number 12, and this was a book I really struggled with placing. I had it higher, I had it lower, I had it all over the place, and I do wonder what people are going to be reacting when they read this issue, because it may not be what people are expecting. After last issue that was really action-packed, and this was the special 12th issue finale, you might think, oh no, this is going to be another insane issue with all this action, because this has been ultimately a martial arts story. It really isn't that. You actually get a lot of huge revelations, or maybe lack of revelations would be the better term, and you wonder where exactly is this going to leave the series moving forward. This could be the final issue of this book, really, in the way it ends. However, there are plenty of hints showing that isn't the case, because a new threat is looming. What exactly that threat is not fully sure, but I did like how it played with expectations in a lot of ways. A huge revelation that happened a few issues ago about someone potentially coming back and what that led to. And I think a lesser writer would try to amp up the melodrama, but I think Kirkman is a little bit better at that. And one, he likes to let things linger. He's notorious for that. But on the other side, I think he understands where you want things to go, where your expectations are lying, and he's all about subverting those expectations. And again, this is Chris Samnee and Matt Wilson, having a ball with this book. Which one thing when it comes to Chris Samnee and his action, the fluidity of it, but it's just a beautiful looking book. The character moments are strong. Seeing just this family kind of come together, and that's again talking about 1000 Storms, when it was just this kid drama, this idea of like losing your first love. This at the center of it, the insanity of everything with the firepower, it's all there, but it's really a family dynamic that's really made it work. Husband and wife and kids, and the way that reads on the page and the realism to it, when you're like, okay, this is clearly coming from comic book creators that have experience and understand what a real relationship of a family might look like, even in the insanity of this. I don't know if this is taking a break, because it being the 12th issue, being oversized. However, if it is, it's a great time to catch up. You do want to read the first graphic novel first before diving into the series, because I do think it's read better that way. But generally, I've really endured this book, and anytime again we get Chris Samnee art, I'm glad he's being put on a book like this, because he's been one of my favorite artists forever, and I'm happy to see him have a hit like this, because it certainly deserved. Number 5 this week is Nocterra number 4, and this was another book that I struggled where the place that I had it all over the place. I eventually went with number 5. Again, that's the thing about numbering. It's really all kind of subjective. I did this list, and a few days after this, it could probably be all different. Anyways, the most important thing is Nocterra number 4. And I'm kind of waiting for this series to disappoint me. I don't know why I'm going into it so pessimistically. I just think when I see a dystopian future, I'm worried that it's going to get lost in its world design, and then everything's going to be left. But this has done a great job. Scott Steiner and Tony Daniel have done a great job of focusing on the characters, especially this family. Using cold opens, I think, was one of the key elements to this, and getting some flashbacks to how things were developing into then flash forward. I did have a little bit of an issue with the ending. I reread it a few times, and I was like, because it's doing the thing where you have narration of the past, but imagery of the present, perhaps, and the way it was doing it, I was finding that it was lessening my comprehension. I just don't know if I was missing it. It wasn't to the point I didn't understand anything on the page. I was just trying to figure out where exactly is this representing? Is this now or in the past? And anyways, besides that little quibble, I do love that at the center of this, there's still that emotional core, with brother and a sister, this weird ragtag family, and this insanity that exists. And it's been doing a great job of building its world as well without it hindering that character stuff, which I'll be honest, sometimes when I read Scott Steiner's stuff, I don't feel like that balance is quite there for me, or I feel like I'm the outside looking in, and it's difficult to have that investment. That's not been the case for Nocterra. I was a little scared because I felt like last issue was gearing towards that way, but this really brought me back, and it's probably my favorite. It's up there as my favorite issue of the series thus far. Probably the most popular title, at least the book that's been talked about the most, is my number 4, and it's The Nice House on the Lake number 1. And I did a mini review of this, and I talked about how I thought the star of this show, the star of this first issue, was Jordy Belair, and I fully still support that idea. The story itself was good. The big thing here is the surprise at the end, like what exactly is happening here. We know what the story is about, is that you have all these individuals that are all friends of this person named Walter. They're random acquaintances. He brings them all together at this lake house. Each person has a different name. You have the accountant, you have the teacher, the artist. They all seem to fit a certain role. So right away, you're kind of suspicious, like, what is this? Is this some sort of death cult? I don't want to ruin surprise, because I do think that's probably one of the strongest elements of the book, but I do think the characters themselves, little glimpses you get of them, you do get a kind of a huge lowdown of who they are, their role. And one of my biggest complaints about James Tynion IV as a writer is that he does tend to overwrite. And I do think some of those occasions are here again, where you're putting so much on the page, especially when it came to introducing these characters, that at times it almost makes you want to skip those bits and tell the story. But let me just see it on the page. And I think that's something he has difficulty doing with at times, at least in my personal opinion. I do think he's a good writer, but that's always something that has hindered me when it comes to really enjoying his stuff. Those issues, I think, are really limited here. I mean, you have actual emails and things like that, but I think it makes sense for this story. And generally, I was surprised in just how strong the characters were, considering the multitude of characters and the little time they had on the page. So it bears well for the future issues. And I do, though, wonder, this was a great first issue in the sense of, a cool surprise, a cool twist ending, but now what happens after that twist? Like, a great issue of a great episode of The Twilight Zone where you get that twist, but the thing is, Twilight Zone will end after that. This is continuing, so now you have to maintain it. Will it be as interesting when you're just kind of dealing with what the story is? It's hard to kind of talk around, but it ends up just becoming something else that we've seen a while. It's seen to a great extent, so it can maintain that quality. Once the reality of what's happening is set in. Maybe there are more surprises, who knows, but in the sense of whetting the appetite, a sense of setting up expectations of what's to come, in the sense of having great potential, I thought number 3 this week is the Swamp Thing number 4, and quite the week for DC and quite the week for the series. This is written by Ram V with art by Mike Perkins. And again, I think this might be the best issue of the series thus far, and maybe outside of one of the issues from Future State. And this was the issue, I think, where we got the exact lowdown of what the series is about. What is the conflict with this book? And usually I would have issue with that, if that I'm 4 issues into a series and I'm now finding out what generally the conflict is. It's like, usually that will detract it. The thing is, it had a good progression of how we got there, setting up not necessarily red herrings in the sense of what we were looking at, but good stepping stones to the grander idea of what is the presence of this book, what is it going for, and again, looking at the green and expanding the idea of what the green exactly is and what it means, and what this introduction to this new Swamp Thing character and the reasoning behind it. And I think that progression was smart, taking the time to kind of set things up and get you understanding of who this person is, but in slowly dripping out the information of what this world is. The other piece too is Mike Perkins' art. Like, this was a week of great art. This is often the case in comics, but man, the page designs he's doing in this, he's able to, I think, really hammer home a lot of the thematic meaning within this book with his designs. Like last issue, for example, you had these different brain scans and the way that they would develop on the page, and that continued here. You saw some flashbacks to that This is not an easy book to draw. You're drawing the green. There's a lot of things on the page, a lot of trees, a lot of detail you need to make this world feel luscious and full. It's not the easiest task in the world. It takes time and it takes talent and it takes effort, and all those have been there for this series thus far. And it's hard to kind of live up to Swamp Things of the past. And I like how this is actually kind of taking that idea and saying, let's move first into that. And I talked about, when I mentioned this series in the past, how it wasn't trying to live up to or trying to rehash what Alan Moore did. And now I kind of have to take that back in a way. But at the same time, the way it's approaching that, the way it's approaching the history and the lore of Swamp Thing actually has me excited, because it's not ignoring what happened previously. In a way, it's using what happened previously to strengthen the present, but in a way that's not just reference material, where it's like, hey, remember this? There's something deeper there, and what exactly is there is not sure. We got a lot of answers, but there's still a lot of questions, and more questions that have been asked because of the answers that were given. If you are a Swamp Thing fan, if you missed the character, I do think this is doing the character justice. It's one of DC's best books, and one of DC's best books of the year thus far. This is another week where really choosing my top 10 was a bit challenging. As I mentioned with a lot of books this week, a lot of them tend to kind of fit together. Like, I'm not really, is my number 5 all that better than my number 1? Not necessarily. I think really my top 5 are really close to one another this week. Again, I really enjoyed them, but there weren't anything that was hugely standing out. And I think everything I really liked, there was just one thing that was a bit detracting, or one question I had that I was unsure about, which kind of stopped it. But when it came down to my number 2 and my number 1, it was a very tough decision, because my number 2, this is a book that every time it's come out so far has been my pick of the week. And I was like, can I go for each issue? Can it be 4 for 4? If I did that, am I being honest, or just trying to kind of do it because, to keep with tradition? And ultimately, this ended up being my number 2, and it's Dead Dog's Bite number 4. This still remains one of my favorite series of the year. I think it's, primarily in my top 5. However, there's parts of the ending I'm just not sure about. Not that I'm saying they're bad. I just think I need to go back and reread everything, because there are, I think pieces that I'm missing. And it's hard to obviously explain about that, because I don't want to give spoilers. I do say at the end of the day, I was satisfied where it ended. I don't think this was a book that could end in a straightforward manner. It wouldn't be true to the story we got thus far. There is some ambiguity over what happened, but I think generally you kind of have to read between the lines, and there's some direct answers, but given in an indirect manner. And this issue has all been about this missing girl, this girl trying to find her missing friend. And from the beginning, I talked about what I loved about this book is, one, the art. The art is creative in design. It's fun. It's enjoyable, despite the fact you're dealing with this horrible situation. There's always this sense of humor there. And I think it's mentioned it's like Twin Peaks meets Juno. And that is very true, because from the beginning, there's always this element of surrealness, and that continued with this book. And that surrealness, I think, has expanded further and further. And when the first issue came, it was really just in the bookends with this narrator. By this issue, it was all over the page. And then Tyler Boss, I loved what he did with 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank, but when I looked at the dialogue, I thought that was mostly because of Matthew Rosenberg. I don't know what role he played, but he certainly has a knack for dialogue as well. This is a book right now. Anytime Tyler Boss has a book, I'm going to be checking it out. He's now on the top of my read pile because of this series. It's one of the first series I recommend. People are like, what should you be reading? It's this series, despite the fact it's not my top issue for the week, it was a really hard choice. And I think generally it was a successful ending, despite some of the questions that I have, that I don't know if the ending kind of had the general impact, but I don't know if that was a failure on my part or a failure on the book itself. I'm going to give it the credit it deserved, because it's earned that, and just enjoy going back and rereading this all over again, because it's been quite the book since it debuted this week. So what is my number 1? If Dead Dog's Bite number 2 didn't quite make it, what beat it out? And it's a bit of an unfair comparison, really, because all the other books, I've enjoyed them over the last year, maybe over the last few years, but none have I been enjoying for the last decade, quite like Deadly Class. And that's why issue number 46 was my pick of the week. And it's not just because I've been reading it for so long, that's kind of a cop out, but it was also a fantastic issue. And the development of these characters has been something else. What we're seeing with this new arc since last issue, that is, the series has flashed forward a decade. So now we're in the 90s, and last issue was like 92, I believe, and now we're in 1997. One, I love the design of showing each year you're getting this kind of look at the Titanic, Wesley Clegg doing that. And why did this book stand out as much as it did? Again, a lot of the character moments, just being with these characters and really just the master work this has been since the beginning. But it is a feast for the eyes when you match Wesley Craig art with Lee Lewis's colors, who's back on color duty. And I don't want to disparage the other colorists. It's always looked like a good series, but he adds something, an entirely different dimension. I really think he's adding an entirely different dimension to this run thus far. This has always been a great looking book, but I don't know what's going on. This was one of the best looking books of the week, probably the best looking books of the week I've seen, and in large part because of the colors and the variety of them. Some examples, like they're swimming in Lake Tahoe, and you see this pristine blue. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful sequence, but underneath you see these ghostly figures that are meant to be symbolic, that have these reds and eerie look to them. And without the colors, it would not be as effective. But maybe the best sequence is a small moment that can maybe go by and you may not even notice it. And it's when you have Marcus, lighting a cigarette in the car, and the way it illuminates the page, it's a moment where you kind of forget you're looking at a comic. It looks so weird. The variation of colors, it's phenomenal. Digital coloring is something that I think people are mastering more and more, and I think what we're getting out of it more than anything is to be able to vary colors on the page to make things have a realistic look to them, or a stylized look. And Lee Lewis, which I think is combined both, where it's not just about looking real, it's about utilizing colors on the page to forward theme and put your eye where it needs to be. And then with Wesley Craig art, it's all just kind of coming together for this run. Now, if you've not read this series and you picked up this issue or the last issue, is this a great starting point? Not really. I don't think you really would enjoy it. However, this is in probably my top 10 favorite series of all time. It's really a book that really changed the way I look at comics to a great extent. So maybe it's a bit unfair. Maybe I'm coming in here with preconceived notions. I fully admit that. But still, there's been plenty of issues of Deadly Class I didn't love, and this one I did. And in large part, like I said, the art really blew me away. Like, I was just at times like not even looking at the words on the page, just looking at the art, soaking it in, and it was fantastic to look at. So Deadly Class is, again, a book that's been around now for a decade, and at times I'm always wondering, like, is this the end? I thought the last arc was going to be the end of it. This arc also flashes, I mentioned it flashes forward, but also gives us a lot of answers about what happened in the school as well. So I was wondering if they were going to do that. And they are. They're not linking the past and the present. And I oddly love it when when a book flashes forward. I don't know why that trope works for me, but what it does, and it's working with this series thus far. All right, well, those are my top 10 books of the week. Again, feel free to agree or disagree with my takes in the comment section below. I know there are a ton of comic book channels out there, so I appreciate any like, any view, any comment that you give me. Just remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.